There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I don't talk about it much anymore. The water does something to memory. It wears it down, smooths it out, until all you've got left is the ache of something sharp you once stepped on barefoot. People think working the Louisiana coast is a hard man's life, but the truth is, it's a lonely one. It gets into your bones the way the salt gets into your clothes until you can't tell where you end and the Gulf begins. I was a deckhand then, 27 years old, running night hauls on a trawler out of Cameron Parish. The boat wasn't much to look at, 30 feet of rust and paint layers so thick they curled in the sun, but she worked. The Adele Marie. That's what was painted on the bow, though no one called her that. To us, she was just the boat. It was August, hot in a way that made the air oily. The storms had been restless that season, hurricanes forming and breaking up before they ever hit land, leaving the sea unsettled. We should have taken that as a sign. But shrimp don't wait for weather, and neither do bills. There were 4 of us on that run. Eddie, the captain, who had hands like twisted oak roots. Miguel, younger than me, but already half deaf from the engines. Big Joe, who wasn't really big, just broad, with shoulders that carried silence heavier than any net. And me. I'd only been with them 2 months, still green to the rhythms, still waking in the night with the boat rocking in my head. The first 2 days were ordinary. Lines thrown, nets cast, haul after haul of brown shrimp sliding on deck in the floodlights. The sea was flat, and the air was thick with diesel fumes and fish slime. We didn't talk much. Fishing at night makes conversation feel sacrilegious, like the ocean's listening, and it doesn't like interruptions. But on the 3rd night, just after midnight, something changed. We dropped the nets, and Eddie had the winches humming as they hauled the heavy lines back in. The sound was something I'd grown used to, that grinding drone, metal pulling against salt-rusted gears, but that night it sounded different, not louder, not softer, just tuned, somehow. It had a rise and fall to it like breath, and then like a melody. I thought at first it was just in my head. I was tired, sweat dripping into my eyes, ears ringing from hours of engines. But then I saw Miguel leaning against the rail, staring at the winches with his mouth half open, and Big Joe had stopped coiling rope, frozen, like he was listening to a voice that spoke only to him. The winches sang. That's the only way I can put it. The cables, the gears, the whole system. It wasn't a machine anymore. It was an instrument plucking out a tune in a language none of us knew. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just harmonic vibration, just the ocean amplifying the sound in the hull. But the hair on my arms said otherwise, and then the silence fell. When the nets slapped onto the deck, heavy with catch, none of us moved, not for a long minute, just stood there, listening to nothing. The air felt carved out, like the sound had taken something with it when it stopped. Eddie was the first to move. He spat overboard, muttered something I didn't catch, and went back to the controls. Miguel crossed himself. Big Joe looked at me and shook his head slow, like, don't ask. I should have left it there. Just a strange moment on a strange night. But when I lay in my bunk later, the rhythm kept running in my skull. Not a song, not exactly, more like a pattern, like words being spoken too low to understand. By dawn, I was sure I'd dreamed it. But the next night, it happened again. Same hour, same hum of the winches. And this time, the pattern was clearer. The rise and fall wasn't random. It was repeating. 4 notes, low and long, followed by 2 sharp ones. Over and over. We all heard it. I know we did, because none of us said a word for the rest of the shift. By the 5th night, Eddie snapped. When the winches started up and the song began, he slammed the throttle, cursing the machine like it was mocking him. The song only got louder, and when the nets came in that time, they weren't heavy with shrimp. They were heavy with nothing. Nothing but water and weeds, the mesh torn in places like it had dragged across rocks. Except we were 40 miles out, no rocks for miles. That was the first night the smell came. I can't explain it right. Not rot, not fish. It was chemical, almost. Sharp, bitter, like the tang of ozone before lightning. It made my teeth ache, made the back of my throat raw. Miguel threw up over the side. Joe wouldn't step near the nets. And Eddie, he just stared at the torn mesh, lips moving without sound. I tried to laugh, to shake them out of it. Said maybe the winches were just vibrating against the hull, maybe some busted radio tower was bouncing signals off the water. But the truth was already sinking in. That smell didn't belong out there, and neither did that sound. The nights bled together after that. Sleep was short, dreams longer. I'd wake to the rhythm in my ears, swearing the bulkheads were vibrating. At dinner, no one spoke. We just ate in silence, forks scraping like echoes. On the seventh night, Big Joe didn't come on deck. He stayed in his bunk, blanket pulled up to his chin like a child. I went down to check on him, but when I stepped inside, I froze. The smell, stronger. Filling the cabin, hanging in the fabric of his blanket, his clothes, even his hair. "Joe," I whispered, trying to keep steady. "You smell that?" He didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling with wide, glassy eyes. When I reached to shake him, his skin was damp, not with sweat, with something slicker, like brine. I pulled back fast. He blinked once, slow, then turned away. That night, the winches didn't sing. The silence was worse. By morning, Joe was gone, not dead, not missing overboard, just gone. His bunk was empty, his boots still there, his coat folded, like he'd walked off into thin air. We searched the boat, every locker, every hold, nothing. No splash heard in the night, no sign of struggle, just absence. Eddie wouldn't call it in, said the Coast Guard would ground us, and we couldn't afford that. But I saw the way his hands shook when he lit a cigarette. I saw the way Miguel whispered under his breath, Spanish prayers tumbling out in a rush. That night, the song came back, and this time, I swear to God, it had words. Not English, not Spanish, not anything I'd ever heard, but they pressed against the inside of my skull, bending thought, shaping dream. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't coming from the winches anymore. It was coming from the sea, from beneath us. The deck lights flickered when the sound swelled. That wasn't supposed to happen. Our generator was old, loud, but steady. I remember how the shadows stuttered across Eddie's face, how his eyes seemed hollow, carved out by the pulsing glow. The winches groaned and then held still, nets straining in the water, the cables thrumming like a bow drawn tight across strings. The song rose and fell, carrying that oily smell with so strong it felt like it coated the inside of my mouth. I staggered to the rail, half ready to throw up, half ready to dive. The water below was black, but not the kind of black I'd grown used to on the Gulf. This was layered, moving. The surface shivered with faint ripples, even though the air was calm and the waves should have been still. And beneath it, light, faint, pulsing with the same rhythm as the sound. I blinked, swore I was imagining it. Phosphorescence, maybe. Sometimes shrimp would stir up algae and the sea would glow green-blue. But this wasn't that. This was deeper. Red. "Back inside," Eddie barked. His voice cracked, broke like it hadn't in years. "Now." I obeyed. Miguel didn't move. He was at the stern, leaning so far over I thought he'd tumble in. His lips moved like he was mouthing the sound back to it, echoing the words. Eddie lunged, caught him by the collar, and yanked him down hard onto the deck. The look Miguel gave him wasn't anger, wasn't fear. It was grief. Like Eddie had just torn him away from something he loved. We dragged him inside, shut the hatch, and for a while we just sat in the galley, breathing diesel and salt and sweat while the sea outside sang to itself. No one slept. Not that night, not the one after. The song didn't wait for the winches anymore. It drifted up through the hull, through the rivets, through our bones. A lullaby we couldn't escape. Eddie stopped eating. He'd stare at the compass, muttering numbers. Miguel hummed under his breath, matching the melody perfectly, as though he'd known it his whole life. I started writing. Anything. Notes, scratches on scraps of cardboard from shrimp boxes, words I didn't recognize, symbols I couldn't explain. On the 10th night, I realized the smell wasn't just chemical. It was familiar. Sharp, bitter, like when lightning struck near the bayou where I grew up. My grandmother used to say storms had a taste, and if you breathed in too deep, you'd drown on dry land. That was what it felt like now. Drowning. Eddie tried to start the engines at dawn. We were supposed to head back by then, nets or no nets, but the boat wouldn't budge. The prop churned like it was chewing through mud, though the water was calm. The whole hull shivered with resistance, as though the sea itself was holding us fast. He cursed, slammed the throttle, lit another cigarette with hands that wouldn't stay still. And then he stopped, stood up slow, eyes narrowing. Listen. The song had changed. It wasn't outside anymore. Not under us. It was inside, in the walls, in the wires, in the steel beams of the Adele Marie. The whole boat was singing. I pressed my hands to my ears until they hurt, but it didn't help. The sound was in my teeth, in my skull. My vision blurred at the edges, and the smell pressed thicker, coating everything, settling in the food, the water, the fabric of our clothes. Miguel started laughing. Not sharp laughter, soft, low, like he'd just heard the best joke in the world. He walked out onto the deck without a word. We didn't follow. The door slammed behind him. I heard his boots scuff the planks, slow, steady, and then stop. The song rose sharp, like a hook snapping taut. Then silence. When we finally opened the hatch, he was gone. No splash, no cry, just gone. Like Joe. His gloves were still on the railing, damp, slick. Eddie didn't speak for the rest of that day. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. By the 12th night, I'd stopped trying to reason it out. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the water glowing red. Every time the engine shifted, I heard words pressing into me, reshaping me. I couldn't remember what home looked like, what land even felt like beneath my feet. All I knew was rhythm. All I knew was the song. That was when Eddie broke. He came down into the galley, sat across from me, and lit one last cigarette. His hands were shaking so bad the match nearly burned his thumb. I ain't dying on this boat, he said, voice low, almost tender. If it wants us, it can come find me on shore. I didn't answer. Didn't know how. He went topside, started untying the skiff. The little fiberglass dinghy we used to run nets to shore sometimes. I watched him through the porthole, the glow of his cigarette trailing like a beacon. He worked fast, desperate, like a man pulling at ropes around his own neck. The water was calm, too calm. When he dropped the skiff in, the song stopped. Dead silence. For the first time in days, I could breathe. I could think. My ears rang with emptiness. Eddie climbed down, started the outboard, and began to pull away. That was when the glow surfaced. Not deep anymore, right under him. The skiff rocked once, hard enough I saw him grab the gunwale. Then again, the water beneath him swirled red, brighter than blood, lighting his face from below. His mouth opened like he was screaming, but I didn't hear a thing, just silence. And then he was gone. Boat, man, light, all pulled under in one smooth gulp. The silence held for a long, long time. Then the song came back, stronger, clearer. But this time it wasn't outside. It was coming from my own chest. I don't remember the rest of that night, just fragments. Pacing the deck, my palms raw from clutching the rail, the taste of iron on my tongue. I think I blacked out at some point because when I opened my eyes again, the sun was up. The sea was calm, the smell was gone, and the Adele Marie was drifting. Alone. No Eddie, no Miguel, no Joe. Just me. The nets were gone. The winches were silent. I thought about calling it in. Thought about putting out a distress signal. But when I touched the radio, the static hummed in the same pattern as the song. I dropped it like it burned. I don't know how I made it back to shore. I don't remember steering, don't remember tying up. Just remember the sand under my feet, my legs shaking, my lungs choking on air that didn't smell like lightning. The Adele Marie never came back. The Coast Guard said they found her 2 weeks later, drifting, empty. No crew, no log, no nets, not even rust on the winches, like she'd been rebuilt clean. When they asked what happened, I told them the storm caught us, that the others went overboard, that I couldn't remember how, and they believed me. But some nights, when the air is heavy and the sky feels too close, I hear it again. Low, steady, 4 notes, then 2 sharp, a song in a language no one should understand, and I know the Gulf remembers me. I didn't sleep for 3 days after I came off that boat. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the water moving under me, shifting like muscle. Every sound in my little rented room on shore, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of a street lamp, twisted itself into that same damned pattern. 4 long notes, too sharp. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just trauma. People break in strange ways when the sea takes their crew. But deep down I knew that wasn't it. You don't forget a voice once it finds you. The parish sheriff came by to take my statement. A big man, always carried himself like he owned whatever room he walked into. But when I told him we lost 3 men, his shoulders sank. Said it wasn't the first time. Said the Gulf swallowed boats whole some years, left no wreck, no survivors. Then he leaned in close and asked if I'd smelled anything. His voice went quiet when he asked, like a man telling a secret to a grave. When I didn't answer, he didn't push. Just patted my shoulder and said the case would go in the file, same as all the others. That file is thick, I bet. I tried to go back to work a month later. Different boat, different crew. But the first time the winches whined, my knees buckled. It didn't matter that the pattern wasn't there. I could hear it anyway, faint, waiting. I walked off the dock and never went back. Instead, I started drifting job to job, construction, carpentry, anything on land. But it followed. The hum of a table saw, the grind of a generator, it always bent itself into the same song. I stopped sleeping by then. Weeks would pass where I only closed my eyes in flashes, minutes at a time. My body learned to live off it, but my mind, not so much. And the smell, that sharp, bitter edge of ozone. It would come and go, seeping through vents caught in my clothes, curling under my pillow. Sometimes I'd wake with my sheets damp, slick like they'd been wrung out in brine. I tried to wash it away. Laundry, bleach, even burning old clothes in the yard. Didn't matter. The smell came back. 3 years passed like that. I don't know how I kept going. Some days I felt normal. Other days I'd catch myself humming without meaning to. The same 4/2 rhythm. I never noticed until someone else did, a cashier, a neighbor, and then the shame would hit, heavy as an anchor. I started avoiding people after that. Moved inland, rented a trailer near the edge of a pine thicket. It was quiet there, dry. I thought maybe distance would help. But the Gulf doesn't forget. One night last fall, I was splitting wood in the yard, the cicadas droning so loud it felt like a wall of sound. Then the rhythm shifted. Subtle at first, 4 long beats too short. My stomach turned cold. The cicadas kept singing, but they weren't singing anymore. They were repeating, carrying the same pattern over and over. I dropped the axe and stumbled inside, locked the doors, turned on every light, sat in the corner with my ears covered, shaking like a child. The sound didn't stop. It was in the walls again, in the wires, in the wind through the trees, everywhere. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours, maybe. Long enough that when I opened my eyes, dawn was bleeding through the blinds, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any storm. That morning, I found something on my porch. A glove. Black, rubber-palmed, crusted with salt. It was Miguel's. I knew it the second I saw it. The same pair he'd left on the railing when he leaned over into the dark. I didn't touch it. Didn't dare. Just stared until the sun was high, until the cicadas started again. Then I shoved it into a box, taped it shut, and buried it in the woods behind the trailer. But I can still smell it, even now, that sharp electric stink curling in the back of my throat. I haven't been back to the Gulf since, haven't been near open water at all. But sometimes, driving past a reservoir crossing a bridge, I'll see it. Not the water itself. The light. Deep down, faint, pulsing in rhythm. And I'll hear it again, low and steady, threading through the bones of the earth. The shrimp boat that sang. The Adele Marie. The Gulf calling me back. And I know one night it will find me. Not out there on the waves, not in the nets or the winches, but here in whatever hollow I've built to keep it away. Because you don't escape a song once you've heard it. You just wait until it comes for you again, and when it does, you don't resist. You answer. The night I pulled my RV off the last paved road into the shadowed mountains, I felt the air itself change. It wasn't just colder, it carried a weight, as if the silence had a body pressing down on me. I'm not someone who spooks easily. My name is Daniel, 42 years old, born and raised in Colorado, and I've camped in more ranges than most people have ever seen on postcards. But that night, as I parked beneath a ridge line that blotted out the stars, I knew something in those peaks didn't want me there. The forest floor was damp, still holding the smell of old rain. Pine needles stuck to my boots when I stepped out to level the rig, and every sound seemed sharper than it should have been. The snap of a twig, the hush of my own breath, the dull groan of the RV settling. That's the thing about mountains. They don't just surround you, they swallow you whole, and your senses keep reaching for distance that doesn't exist. The ridges bounced sound in ways I couldn't explain. My own cough echoed back to me from the dark, as if someone else stood out there, imitating me. I lit a lantern and walked a short stretch of trail near camp. The air smelled of wet stone, cold iron, and the faint sweetness of moss. I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone, though I hadn't seen another camper for miles. There had been a ranger station 20 minutes down the road, shuttered and empty for the season. A hand-lettered sign warned of seasonal closures, hazardous conditions. I thought it meant snow or rockfall, but the way the paint had run down the board looked like someone had written it in the rain, rushed, desperate. That first night I heard it, the sound that became the center of my fear. A low, drawn-out hum rising from somewhere above the ridge. It wasn't wind, it was too steady, too deliberate, as though a throat was pressed against the sky itself. I stepped out into the freezing night air, lantern shaking in my hand, and listened. The sound didn't move with the air currents, didn't fade. It simply hovered, vibrating in my chest, until I could feel my pulse racing against it. My mind tried to rationalize, maybe a power line, maybe distant machinery. But there were no lines out there, no roads except the one I came on. When I tried to sleep, the humming stopped, and in its absence, I thought I heard whispers instead, tiny, broken syllables slipping through the cracks in the RV walls. I pressed my ear against the window, against the aluminum frame. Nothing. Then, when I backed away, there it was again, a wordless murmur that seemed to come not from outside, but from the very air inside my chest. I told myself fatigue was playing tricks. I'd driven nearly 8 hours that day, climbing higher and higher until the fuel gauge begged me to stop. But when dawn finally arrived, I stepped outside and saw something that broke my confidence. Patterns in the dirt around the RV. They weren't animal prints. They weren't boot tracks either. They were shallow grooves, as if something had dragged fingertips or claws around my rig in the night, circling it again and again until the soil gave way. I spent the day hiking higher, thinking maybe I'd find an explanation. The trail was narrow and laced with switchbacks. Patches of snow melted into rivulets that hissed as they slipped beneath the rocks, and every now and then the humming returned. Always distant, always impossible to place. I'd stop, heart hammering, wait for it to fade, then continue. At one point, I thought I saw movement between the trees, a tall, pale shape sliding uphill, too smooth for human steps. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the sharp smell of copper in the air. By the second night, I was unraveling. The sounds had grown bolder. Not just the hum, but cracks of stone shifting, the high wail of what might have been elk but rang too hollow, too human. And when I closed my eyes, I dreamed of voices calling my name from inside the mountain, each syllable drawn out until it didn't sound like my name anymore, but something older trying to wear it like a mask. I woke to the lantern swinging wildly, though the RV was still. Outside, the forest was darker than I'd ever seen. No stars, no moon, just a pressing void. And somewhere within it, a rhythm began, a knock. Soft at first, then harder, pounding against the frame of the RV door. My breath froze in my throat. The handle rattled, metal against metal. I didn't move. I couldn't. Whoever or whatever was out there, it wasn't just trying to get in. It was waiting to see if I'd open the door myself. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. Hours crawled by before the first gray light touched the ridge. I stepped out cautiously, my boots crunching in the frost, and saw nothing but the faint prints again, deeper this time, pressed into the soil in looping arcs, as though something had walked not with feet but with sound itself, carving vibrations into the earth. And I knew then, I wasn't just hearing the mountains were hearing me. I didn't leave that morning, though every instinct told me to. That's the thing about being out there. You learn to measure fear against practicality. I was too far into the range to turn around without losing half a day's daylight, and something in me wanted to prove I wasn't weak. Pride, maybe. Or maybe the pull of the unknown. I told myself that if I packed up too quickly, I'd regret it. I'd never know what the sounds were. I'd never understand. And that's how the mountains catch you. They convince you curiosity is safer than fear, right up until the moment you realize it isn't. The air grew heavy as the day went on. The sun was bright, but felt cold, stripped of warmth by the thin mountain atmosphere. I busied myself with chores, fixing a loose latch on the RV, boiling water for coffee, checking the map as though any line of ink could explain what was happening. Every time I sat down, though, I felt the hum return. Not loud, not external, but inside me, faint as a heartbeat, not my own. It made me restless, made my palms sweat even in the chill. By mid-afternoon, I decided to hike further up the ridge. I thought if I could get high enough, maybe I'd find the source. The trail wound past boulders draped in lichen, through stands of fir so thick the light fractured into columns. At one bend, I froze. Ahead of me, the soil was scattered with small stones arranged in a spiral. Not natural, not wind, not runoff. A deliberate shape pressed into the earth. I stood there, breath shallow, trying to reason it away, but the longer I looked, the more it seemed like the stones weren't just lying there. They were humming. It was subtle, almost imagined. The faintest vibration beneath the soles of my boots, the air trembling just enough to tickle the inside of my ears. I backed away slowly, unwilling to disturb it. And when I turned, the forest had changed. The trail behind me looked unfamiliar, as though the trees had shifted closer together. The ridgeline above was higher than I remembered. It felt like the entire mountain had leaned forward, listening. I hurried back down, fighting the urge to run. I knew better than to panic out here. Running only made mistakes. But the forest pressed at me, every creak of branches like a voice in a language I almost understood. When I broke back into camp, my relief was sharp enough to hurt. I slammed the RV door shut, locked it twice, and sat with my back against the frame. That night, the knocking returned. Not at the door this time, but on the windows. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound deliberate, measured, circling the RV one pane at a time. I pulled the blinds closed, but the tapping followed, like fingers brushing the glass in slow rhythm. Then it stopped. Silence. Until the hum began again, low and steady, not outside but inside the RV. The air itself buzzed, shaking the pots, rattling the lantern hook. My teeth ached with it. I shouted then, angry, desperate. Stop! My voice cracked in the stillness, and for a moment it worked. The hum cut off like a switch had been flipped. I stood trembling, chest heaving, sweat prickling my spine. And then, from outside, a voice answered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was mine. My voice, echoing back, warped and hollow. Stop, it said, in the same broken tone. Then again, stop. And again, until it wasn't words anymore, just the shape of them stretched thin, unraveling into sound. I didn't sleep. I sat with the lantern burning until dawn, waiting for something to open the door, waiting for the windows to shatter, but nothing came. When the first pale light crept down the ridge, I forced myself outside. My legs were weak, my hands shaking. The frost glittered across the clearing, and I saw new tracks in the soil. Not spirals this time, not loops, lines. Straight lines running from the ridge down to the RV, converging at my door, and every line was shallowly grooved, like the earth itself had been carved by sound. I thought about leaving then, driving down the mountain, forgetting this place ever existed. But the problem was, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left, something would follow. The sound wasn't bound to the ridge. it was bound to me. By afternoon, clouds began to gather, gray and swollen, pressing lower until the peaks disappeared. The air smelled of ozone, sharp and metallic. I packed a small bag, flashlight, knife, water, and forced myself back onto the trail. I had to see. I had to know what lived up there. The climb was harder this time, the soil slick under my boots, the wind cutting sharp against my face. The spiral of stones was gone, scattered as if it had never existed. But higher up, near the tree line, I found something worse. A clearing, ringed with stones taller than me, each one etched with grooves that looked like waves frozen in rock. They weren't letters. They weren't symbols. They were sound made solid, captured in the earth. When the wind swept through, the stones moaned, deep, resonant, like voices calling from beneath the ground. I staggered back, ears ringing. The hum was louder now, rising from the very soil beneath my feet, vibrating through my bones. My chest tightened, my vision swam. And in the resonance, I thought I heard words. Not English, not anything I could translate, but words nonetheless, intoned in rhythms that felt older than language. I fled. I don't remember half the descent, only that the RV appeared like salvation through the trees. I stumbled inside, locked the door, collapsed against the floor. And when I caught my breath, I realized the humming hadn't stayed behind. It was inside the RV with me, in the walls, in the frame, in my lungs. That night, I didn't hear tapping. I didn't hear knocking. What I heard was singing. Soft, layered voices rising from the forest, swelling until the whole mountain seemed to be chanting. And every voice, no matter how far, no matter how strange, carried my tone. My voice multiplied and warped, echoing in a chorus that would not stop. And I knew then I wasn't just a visitor in the mountains. I was part of them now, whether I wanted to be or not. The third night was when panic finally set its claws into me. Until then, I had convinced myself I could hold my ground, that if I stayed calm, if I treated the sounds like weather or wildlife, I could outlast them. But when the sky went black and the chanting began again, that fragile wall of control splintered. It started as a vibration in the floor of the RV. My cup rattled. The cutlery in the drawer clicked together like chattering teeth. Then the voices rose, not outside this time, but through the very frame of the vehicle, every panel buzzing with a resonance I could feel in my molars. The sound pressed against me until I thought my bones would crack from the inside out. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The voices weren't entering through air. They were inside me, blooming in my chest, whispering into the cavity of my skull. My own voice threaded through the chorus again, distorted, stretched thin. Daniel, it called. Over and over. My name, wrapped around syllables I didn't understand until I couldn't tell where I ended and the mountain began. I snapped. I grabbed the flashlight and the knife from the counter and threw the RV door open, screaming into the night. My voice sounded small against that endless chorus, but I screamed anyway, begging it to stop, to leave me alone. The forest seemed to lean closer with every echo as if my defiance only fed it. That's when I saw them. Shapes between the trees, tall and pale, flickering like mist but moving with purpose. Their outlines rippled as though they were made of sound instead of flesh. Every time the chorus swelled, their bodies quivered in rhythm, their long limbs bending in ways no human joints should bend. And still, above it all, I heard my own voice leading them, an anchor in their cacophony. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. The window panes quaked with every note, every vibration. I held the knife tight, though I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't cut sound. You can't fight what isn't flesh. My chest heaved, lungs dragging at the thin mountain air, and still the voices poured through me until I was dizzy with it. I thought then of something the old ranger at the base had once told me years back on another trip. We'd been drinking coffee from tin cups at dawn when he said, "These mountains don't forget. You step in wrong, they'll carry your echo long after you're gone." I'd laughed at the time, thought it was just poetic talk. But now I felt it. These weren't just sounds. They were memories. Echoes caught in stone, repeating, wearing new skins. The night became unbearable. I stuffed blankets under the windows, shoved clothes against the vents, but the sound was already in me. It felt like it was reordering my thoughts, pressing memories out of place. I tried to recall the faces of my family, the shape of my own house back in town, but they blurred, smeared over with the ridgeline and the dark forest pressing against the RV. It was as if the mountain wanted me to forget the world below entirely, to belong only to it. At some point, exhaustion broke me down. I passed out, slumped against the table, knife still clutched in my hand. And in that sleep, the mountain gave me a dream. I stood in the clearing with the soundstones, but they weren't inert. They towered above me, glowing faintly with a blue-white light. Each groove on their surface throbbed with resonance, and from their tops spilled tendrils of mist that reached down like fingers. In the dream, I understood their language, felt it more than heard it. They were telling me they had always been here, long before I came, long before the trails, long before the maps, and that every human voice in the range belonged to them in the end. When I jolted awake, the lantern was dead, my breath fogging the air. But worse, my own voice kept speaking even though my mouth was shut. I froze, hand trembling at my throat, but the sound came anyway, low and guttural, slipping out from the corners of the room. "Daniel," it said. "Daniel." I couldn't stay. Logic, pride, curiosity, none of it mattered anymore. If I stayed, I wasn't coming back as myself. I grabbed my keys, stumbled into the driver's seat, and fired the engine. The headlights cut a thin line into the trees, and I shoved the RV into gear, bouncing down the rocky track. The chorus followed, swelling higher, shattering against the glass. My own voice rose loudest, screaming my name until it didn't sound like a name anymore, just a wound in the night. The road twisted down the mountain, and I kept the accelerator pressed, heart pounding like it might burst. But no matter how fast I went, the sound stayed with me. It lived in the engine rumble, in the tires grinding over stone, in the very air scraping past the windows. And then, sudden silence. At a sharp bend, it all cut out. The voices, the hum, even the forest itself. I slowed, breath-ragged, ears ringing from the absence. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, that I'd shaken it off, left the mountain behind. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood froze. Sitting at the table in the back of the RV was me. Pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving in a sound I couldn't hear. I slammed the brakes. The mirror went dark, empty again. Nothing there, just the trembling lantern swaying on its hook. But I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The mountain wasn't chasing me anymore. It was already inside. I didn't stop driving until the first hints of dawn brushed the eastern sky. My eyes burned from the effort of keeping them open, and my grip on the wheel had locked my fingers into claws. But the silence in the RV was worse than the voices had been. It pressed into my skull, making every creak of the chassis feel like a shout, every breath like a trespass. When I finally pulled over at a turnout, carved into the mountainside, I killed the engine and just sat there, waiting for something, anything to move, to break the stillness. The air outside was pale and brittle, the kind of morning where frost glitters on every blade of grass, sharp as broken glass. I stepped out, boots crunching, and the mountain looked almost innocent again. Snow-dusted ridges, quiet pines, a hawk gliding in the distance, but I couldn't shake the rearview image. My own face staring from the table, the lips moving, soundless. I hadn't dared look back yet. The thought of what I might see in that narrow RV aisle was too much. I tried to ground myself. Coffee, food, routine. I lit the small stove outside and set a kettle on, the hiss of flame a small comfort. But when the water began to boil, the sound carried a rhythm I couldn't ignore. A low, pulsing hum rising from the metal, mimicking the chorus I'd fled. I yanked it off the flame, heart hammering, but the hum continued in my chest, even as the kettle went quiet. That's when the doubts began. Not fear, not dread, but a more insidious enemy, uncertainty about what was real at all. Was I still in the mountains? Had I left? Or was I still parked in that clearing, dreaming this descent? My mind replayed every sound, every glimpse, and each time it felt less like an external presence and more like an infection. The mountain had planted itself in me, and now it was rewriting the way I heard the world. I forced myself back into the RV, knife still clutched tight. The interior smelled of metal and old pine sap, familiar, grounding. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, like walking into a church whose air is too heavy to breathe. I checked the table first, heart leaping. Empty. No second version of me waiting there. Relief washed over me so sharp it nearly brought me to my knees. Then I saw the grooves. They weren't deep, barely scratches in the linoleum floor, but they ran in arcs, spirals, intersecting lines, etched across the aisle between the table and the door. I knelt, fingertips brushing them, and realized they weren't scratches at all. They were sound waves, carved as though the RV itself had become a recording surface. I stood so fast I hit my head on the cabinet. My own voice echoed in my memory, shouting into the night, begging it to stop. The mountain had captured it, brought it inside. The day dragged. I tried to drive further down, but the road twisted back up, curling along switchbacks that led me no closer to the foothills. Every mile felt like a loop, as if the mountain itself had folded time. My GPS flickered, froze, then went blank. No signal, no map, just a blinking icon caught in the void. By late afternoon, I'd circled back to the same turnout where I'd stopped that morning. I knew it by the crooked pine jutting over the guardrail, its trunk split like a pitchfork. No matter how many miles I drove, I ended up here again. The panic rose in me like fire in dry brush. I kicked the side of the RV until my foot throbbed, screaming into the stillness. "Let me out! Do you hear me? Let me out!" My voice rang against the ridges, bounced back in fragments. Out, 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 until I couldn't tell if it was my echo or something answering me. That night, the silence broke again. Not with humming, not with chants, but with footsteps on the RV roof. Slow, deliberate, one after another, pacing back and forth above me. I held my breath, knife poised, ears straining. The roof creaked under the weight. Dust sifted down through the vent. Then, the footsteps stopped, and a new sound began. Tapping. Inside the RV, behind me. I turned, slow as ice cracking. At first, I saw nothing, just the shadows pooling in the back. Then, from the corner near the bed, came a shape rising from the darkness. Tall, thin, edges blurred like mist, but with a face, my face. Its lips moved silently, forming my name over and over, but no sound reached me. Only the tapping continued, echoing from everywhere at once. I lunged forward, knife raised, but the blade passed through it like cutting fog. The shape only tilted its head, expression blank, before collapsing back into shadow. And the tapping stopped. I collapsed against the table, chest heaving, knife clattering from my grip. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't trying to get in, it already had. Sleep was impossible. My thoughts raced, circling like wolves. Every creak of the RV became a whisper, every gust of wind a chorus warming its throat. I thought about driving off the mountain at full speed, taking the RV with me into the gorge just to end it. But something in me resisted. Not hope, not reason. Something darker. The mountain didn't want me dead. It wanted me alive, listening. So I sat through the night, waiting for dawn, waiting for a sound I could no longer distinguish from my own heartbeat. And as the first pale light brushed the ridges, I finally understood there would be no escape. Not by road, not by waking, not by screaming. The mountain wasn't outside anymore. It had followed me into every breath, every thought. And the more I listened, the more I wanted to. By the fourth night, the line between myself and the mountain was threadbare, fraying with every sound. I no longer knew which echoes were mine and which belonged to something else. Even the smallest noises carried weight. The groan of the RV frame in the cold, the sigh of wind slipping through pine needles, the faint pop of cooling metal after I shut off the stove. Each sound seemed to stretch longer than it should, as if the air itself didn't want to let it go. That was when I stopped trusting silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt like silence was listening. Every time I tried to calm myself, to breathe steady and think rationally, the quiet grew thicker, pressing against my ears until it felt alive. I realized with horror that the silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was the mountain holding its breath, waiting for me to make a noise it could carry away. I avoided speaking. Even muttering curses under my breath felt dangerous. I moved with care, setting objects down gently, avoiding the clatter of utensils or the squeak of the table hinges. But no matter how careful I was, the mountain always answered. A drip of water from the faucet turned into a knock at the window. The shuffle of my boots against the floor became a whisper in the corner. And every time I resisted the urge to test it, to say something out loud, to prove I still had control, gnawed at me until my tongue felt heavy in my mouth. Near midnight, I broke. My throat burned from holding back, my lips dry, my chest tight. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, I said, "Hello." The reply came instantly. Not outside, not distant, right behind my ear. My own voice matching the pitch exactly. "Hello." I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the RV's shadows, but nothing was there. Only the aisle, narrow and empty, the spiral grooves on the linoleum catching the light. I pressed my back against the wall, heart slamming so hard it hurt. The voice came again, softer this time, like it was inside my head but still separate. "Stay." I don't know how long I froze like that, staring at the door, waiting for the handle to rattle. My muscles burned from holding still, but I didn't move. The word stayed lodged in me, a single command: stay. By dawn, I was unraveling. I couldn't tell if I wanted to flee or obey. My body trembled with exhaustion, but my mind spun with something worse, a strange comfort in the sound. The mountain had stolen my voice, but hearing it return, even warped, filled some hollow place inside me I hadn't known was empty. It was as if the wilderness had reached out and said, "You are not alone." But it wasn't kindness. It was ownership. That morning, desperate for clarity, I hiked back toward the clearing with the sound stones. The trail felt shorter this time, as if the mountain was pulling me toward it. When I broke through the tree line, the stones stood silent, but not dormant. Frost clung to their surfaces, highlighting the grooves that wound around them like the tracks of some ancient record. I stepped closer, breath fogging, ears straining, and then I heard it. Not with my ears, but in the marrow of my bones. The grooves sang when I touched them. My fingers brushed the frozen stone, and a sound rose not external, but inside me. A memory of my own voice, screaming into the night, replayed through my veins. I yanked my hand back, but the sound lingered, faint and echoing. I realized then what the mountain had done. It wasn't making new sounds. It was taking mine, taking every echo, every cry, every breath, and folding them into itself. A living archive, carved in stone and soil, playing back pieces of me until I didn't know where I ended, and it began. I staggered back, nearly tripping over roots, and the stones groaned. Not with wind, not with weather. They groaned with me. My fear, my heartbeat, my ragged breath, all amplified into a chorus that circled the clearing. It was unbearable. I clamped my hands over my ears and ran, crashing through brush, branches tearing at my jacket. By the time I stumbled into camp, the RV looked less like shelter and more like a trap. I leaned against it, chest heaving, and the silence descended again. Only now I recognized it for what it was. Not emptiness, but patience. The mountain waiting for my next sound, my next offering. Inside, I collapsed at the table, head in my hands. I wanted to cry, but I didn't dare make the noise. My own sobs would become theirs. My mind flickered through every sound I'd ever made here. Coughs, curses, footsteps, breaths, and I knew none of them belonged to me anymore. The mountain had them all, playing them back in whatever shape it chose, and then I heard it again. My name. But this time it wasn't warped. It wasn't hollow. It was perfect. My exact voice, tone for tone, syllable for syllable, coming from the doorway. I looked up. The door was closed, but the handle shifted, slow, deliberate, and in that moment I knew whatever was out there wasn't trying to come in. It was trying to trade places. I held my breath as the handle quivered, metal ticking softly like a clock winding down. My knife was already in my hand, but it felt useless, a tool meant for flesh and bone, not whatever stood outside that door. The silence pressed in thick around me, and then came the voice again, clear and calm, not muffled by wood or distance. Daniel. Open. It was mine. Exactly mine. The cadence, the weariness, the rasp in the throat that long nights on the road give you. My stomach turned cold. Every instinct screamed to barricade the door, to retreat, to vanish inside the RV and never step out again. But another part of me, quieter, more dangerous, wanted to obey, to see if the voice was truly mine. I forced myself to back away, step by careful step until my shoulders hit the counter. My breath was shallow, fogging the glass of the small kitchen window. The handle stilled, the silence stretched, then the knocking began. Slow, gentle, a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. My chest synced to it without my permission, like my body was being conducted by something outside. Open, the voice said again. You're tired, let me in. I can rest for you. The words weren't just sound, they carried weight, pressing into my skull like a command. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the rhythm of the knocks kept time with my pulse until I couldn't tell which one was leading the other. I snapped. Lunging forward, I twisted the deadbolt and yanked the door open in one motion. Knife raised. Nothing. The clearing lay empty under a smear of moonlight, frost glittering across the soil. The forest stood silent, still. No footprints, no figure. Just the hum, low and steady, rising again from the ground. And then I heard laughter, behind me. I spun, knife slashing the air, and froze. Sitting at the table was me, not mist, not a shadow. Solid, tangible, same jacket, same tired eyes, same scar at the corner of the lip. He leaned forward, arms folded, and smiled like we shared a private joke. You're late, he said in my voice. I staggered back, colliding with the counter. The knife shook in my hand, my breath ragged. What are you? I managed to choke out. He tilted his head, studying me with a familiarity that was worse than malice. I'm you, the part you left behind every time you shouted, every time you begged. The mountain doesn't forget, Daniel. It just keeps what you give it. I shook my head, the words pounding against my skull. No, you're not me. The other me smiled wider. Aren't I? You thought you were alone up here. You thought you could shout into the dark and not be heard. But echoes are just memories. And memories don't fade in these mountains, they grow. The hum swelled, rattling the dishes in the cabinets, buzzing through my bones. The figure stood, moving in perfect sync with me as I staggered sideways. When I stepped back, he stepped forward. When I clenched the knife tighter, he mirrored it, his blade flashing in the same trembling grip. I couldn't breathe. The RV was too small, too narrow, walls pressing in like the mountain itself had followed me inside. My reflection, or whatever it was, backed me toward the door. My pulse hammered so hard I thought my chest would split. Why fight? It whispered, voice softer now, coaxing. You don't need to carry fear anymore. Give it to me. Stay in the silence. Let the mountain keep you. You'll never be alone again. And for a heartbeat, I wanted to. The idea of laying down my burden, of sinking into that endless chorus, was almost beautiful. No more isolation, no more fear, just sound carrying me forever through the ridges. But then I thought of my sister's laugh back home, of the way she teased me for always running to the wilderness instead of to people. I thought of the smell of coffee in my kitchen, of the hum of traffic on a Sunday morning, of everything fragile and human that the mountain couldn't touch. If I let go, I'd never see any of it again. No, I whispered. My voice cracked, but it was mine. The other me tilted his head, smile fading. The hum faltered, sharp and angry. The air vibrated so violently that my teeth ached. He lunged. I swung the knife, not at him, but at the window. The glass shattered, the cold night air rushing in with a howl. The sound exploded outward, breaking the hum's rhythm, fracturing it into chaos. The figure screamed in my voice, the sound jagged, unnatural, tearing at the air like claws. I leapt through the broken window, glass biting into my arms, and hit the ground hard. My breath ripped in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, sprinting into the trees. Behind me, the RV pulsed with light and sound, every panel shuddering as the hum screamed itself raw. I ran until my lungs were fire, until my legs buckled beneath me, until the forest gave way to stone and frost and silence. And still in the ringing emptiness, I heard it. My own voice, broken now, distant, carried through the ridges. It wasn't finished with me. It would never be finished with me. I don't remember falling asleep. At some point, exhaustion crushed me, and I woke lying on a bed of pine needles with frost stiffening my jacket. The forest was still, but not silent. The silence here had texture, like a breath being held, like the weight of an unseen crowd. My ears rang faintly, though I knew it wasn't my body. It was the mountain humming low, waiting for me to move. When I opened my eyes, the light was strange. Dawn, or maybe dusk. The sky bruised purple, the trees black silhouettes. Time had become as unreliable as sound. My watch had stopped, my phone screen glared blank when I tried to wake it. Only the mountain kept time now, and it ticked with every beat of my heart. I forced myself up, body aching, glass cuts stinging along my arms. The RV was gone. The road was gone. Just ridges and trees and frost. I staggered forward, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to move. Staying still meant letting the hum fill me completely. The deeper I went, the more the landscape warped. Paths curled back on themselves. Rocks appeared in new places when I turned around. The trees groaned as if their trunks were hollow, carrying voices through them. Every so often I heard footsteps that matched my own, a half beat behind, like a second Daniel trailing me just out of sight. At one bend, I stopped cold. Ahead, through the thinning trees, I saw a cabin. Small, squat, smoke curling faintly from a pipe. Relief flared in me so fast it hurt. A cabin meant people. People meant escape from whatever the mountain had wrapped around me. I stumbled forward, throat tight with hope, but the closer I came, the stranger it looked. The walls weren't wood. They were stone, carved with grooves that pulsed faintly in the half-light. The smoke from the chimney didn't dissipate into the sky. It coiled downward, curling into the earth like it was being inhaled. And standing in the doorway was me, not the pale mimic from the RV. This version of me looked whole, alive. His clothes were clean, his eyes clear, his posture calm. He leaned against the frame and smiled like he'd been waiting. "About time," he said in my voice, steady and warm. "I thought you'd never make it." I froze, hands trembling at my sides. "You're not real," he chuckled. "Neither are you. Not anymore. You've been out here too long, Daniel. You think the mountain hasn't already taken you? Look at your hands." I did. My skin was pale, almost translucent, faint grooves running across my palms like etched lines, sound waves written into me. I dropped to my knees, bile rising in my throat. He stepped closer, crouching so his eyes met mine. "It doesn't have to hurt. You keep fighting, but all you're doing is wearing yourself thin. The mountain keeps us. All of us. Every echo, every cry. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't even have to choose. You've already given yourself to it." His words slid into me like hooks, pulling at the frayed threads of my mind. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to rest, to stop bleeding fear into every breath. But another part, the last stubborn piece of me, screamed that if I gave in, there'd be nothing left to carry back down the mountain, nothing left that was human. I staggered back, shaking my head. "No, I'm not staying here." His smile faltered, then hardened. The grooves on the stone walls began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The hum rose, surrounding us, shaking the earth. My double stood tall, voice booming through the resonance. "Then you'll never leave." The ground split. Sound poured up from the cracks, visible as waves that bent the air, warping the trees, rattling my bones. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was inside me, rewriting me. My double advanced, every step echoing twice, thrice, until it sounded like an army marching through the clearing. I ran, blind, desperate, crashing into the forest with no thought but escape. Branches whipped my face, roots clawed my ankles, but I kept going, lungs burning, ears bleeding from the force of the sound. Behind me, the mountain roared with my own voice, calling my name again and again until it no longer sounded like a name, but like a sentence. At last, I broke through onto a ledge. The valley stretched below, vast and cold, dotted with patches of mist. For the first time in days, I saw distance, saw a world beyond the ridges. Hope flared. Maybe if I climbed down, maybe if I reached the bottom, I could still break free. But when I looked back, the forest had closed behind me. No path, no cabin, no double. Only the mountain, silent now, watching. And then, carried on the wind, came a single word. My word. Stay. It was soft, gentle, almost kind. And in the marrow of my bones, I felt the truth I didn't want to face. The mountain wasn't chasing me anymore. It was waiting for me to come back on my own. The valley below looked like salvation. Broad, sweeping, untouched by the weight of the ridges. I stared at it until my eyes burned, convincing myself that if I could just start down, if I could just put distance between myself and the humming peaks, I might claw my way back to the world. But the mountain had other plans. The first step I took onto the slope crumbled beneath me. Stones broke free and skittered downward, but they didn't sound like rocks tumbling. They sounded like voices, hundreds of them, shrieking in panic as they fell. I staggered back, choking on the noise, hands pressed hard against my ears. The valley vanished behind a wall of mist rising from nowhere, curling up in gray curtains that swallowed every trace of escape, my chest locked tight. The mist wasn't just hiding the valley, it was carrying sound. Low murmurs twisted in the fog, voices layered together until they built into words. My words. Every phrase I had ever muttered to myself while driving, every curse I had whispered under my breath, every shout I had thrown into the night, now repeated back at me in 1,000 tones. I dropped to my knees, shaking, desperate to breathe. The fog seeped closer, cool against my skin, filling my nose with the faint metallic tang of blood. My stomach turned, and for a moment, I thought about letting it cover me completely. It would be easier than fighting, easier than thinking. But something kept me anchored. One stubborn memory. My sister, standing in the doorway of my house the night before my trip, rolling her eyes as she said, "You'll get yourself lost one of these days." She'd laughed, but her eyes had been serious, worried, and I had promised her, I always come back. The mountain wanted me to forget that promise, but I clenched it tight, using it like a lifeline, dragging myself to my feet. I turned from the valley and stumbled back into the trees, the fog curling at my heels like smoke. The forest seemed endless now, paths splitting and converging, every direction echoing with sounds I couldn't trust. Branches creaked like doors opening, stones cracked like footsteps. Sometimes I heard my own laughter ahead of me, and I had to fight the urge to chase it. Other times I heard sobbing behind me, and every instinct screamed to turn back, to help. But I knew if I followed, I'd never find myself again. Hours blurred, or maybe minutes. Time was a broken compass. The deeper I went, the louder the humming became. Not sharp now, but low and constant, like the steady breathing of some vast animal surrounding me. And beneath it, faintly, words rose. Not in English, not in anything human. But my mind strained to translate, filling the gaps with my own voice until I couldn't tell if the mountain was speaking or if I was. I stumbled into another clearing and froze. The RV was there, perfect, untouched. No shattered windows, no spirals carved into the floor. It gleamed in the weak light as though I had just parked it that morning. Every nerve in my body screamed that it was a trap, but exhaustion dragged me forward anyway. I pressed my hand to the door, half expecting it to be ice cold. Instead, it was warm like skin, warm like something alive. My throat closed. I yanked the door open. Inside, I was waiting. Not one of me this time. Dozens. Every seat filled, every corner occupied by a Daniel, each in a different state. Some pale and trembling, some smiling faintly, some weeping silently into their hands. And every single one looked up at me in unison. The sound that followed wasn't voices. It was a chord, my chord, built from every breath I'd ever taken in these mountains. It vibrated through the air, through the floor, through my chest until I thought I might dissolve into it. The nearest one stood, calm and steady, eyes locked to mine. "You've been here before," he said gently. "You'll be here again. This is what the mountain keeps. This is what you are." I staggered back, shaking my head, tears burning my eyes. No, I'm still me. I'm still me. But the sound swelled. drowning out my denial, filling me until my own thoughts grew faint. The other Daniels stepped closer, their footsteps sinking in perfect rhythm, their voices rising in a chant that matched my heartbeat. I clutched my chest, gasping, trying to hold on to the memory of my promise. My sister's laugh, the feel of coffee steam against my face, the crackle of city noise far from these ridges. But the mountain pressed harder, whispering, "You are echo. You are sound. Stay." And in that moment, teetering on the edge of collapse, I realized my choice wasn't about escape anymore. It was about identity. If I gave in, I'd survive, but not as Daniel. If I resisted, the mountain might kill me, bury me in silence. The chorus surged, waiting for my answer. And I knew I had only one breath left to decide who I was. The RV shook with the force of their chanting, of my chanting. Every version of me, lips moving in perfect unison, building a wall of sound that pinned me to the doorframe. My knees buckled. My knife slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor, lost beneath the stamp of echoing footsteps. I pressed my palms against my ears, desperate to block them out, but the sound was inside me now. It was the rhythm of my blood, the pulse in my throat, the scrape of breath in my lungs. The mountain had tuned me like an instrument, and it was playing me into the ground. The one nearest stepped closer. His eyes were calm, almost kind, but empty in the way an abandoned house is empty, hollow, waiting to be filled. He lifted his hand and pointed at me, and the chanting broke into silence. "You are tired," he said, voice steady and warm. My voice, but perfected, stripped of doubt. "Let us carry it. Give yourself to us, and you will never feel alone again." The silence after the chant was worse than the chant itself. Heavy, suffocating, thick with expectation. The other versions stared at me, unblinking, their faces twitching faintly, as though struggling to contain the sound pressing at their lips. My heart pounded, frantic. I thought of surrender, of letting the mountain take me, dissolve me into its chorus. No more fear, no more wandering, just endless sound, endless belonging. It would be so easy, but then, like a spark in the dark, I remembered her again. My sister. Her laugh, sharp and unpolished. Her voice when she told me, "You'll get yourself lost one of these days." And beneath that memory, I heard something else. Another sound. Silence. Not the heavy silence of the mountain, but the soft, living silence of a house at dawn. The silence of shared coffee, the silence of someone for you to come home. I latched onto it with everything I had. My voice tore free of my throat, raw and ragged. "I am not yours." The room convulsed. The chorus screamed, the walls vibrating, windows shattering into shards of sound. My doubles staggered back, their faces twisting, splitting, collapsing into waves of static. The hum rose like a wounded animal, shaking the ground beneath us. I stumbled forward, glass cutting into my hands, forcing myself toward the shattered window. Behind me, the figures reached, their arms stretching unnaturally, fingers dissolving into lines of vibrating air. One last step, and I hurled myself through the window into the freezing night. The air hit me like knives, cold and sharp, but it was air. Clean, thin. My lungs burned as I dragged it in, running blind into the trees. Behind me, the RV roared with light and sound, a beacon pulsing against the ridgeline, screaming my name in every tone imaginable. I didn't look back. I ran until my body gave out, until my legs crumpled beneath me, until the world blurred into shadow and frost. I collapsed against a fallen log, chest heaving, blood freezing on my skin, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, maybe longer, I heard nothing. No hum, no chant, no voices, just wind moving through branches, simple and ordinary. I cried then, silent, shaking sobs that racked my body until exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke, it was daylight, real daylight, the kind that cuts through the mist, that warms skin even through cold air. Birds called faintly in the trees, the hum was gone. The grooves on my palms had faded. The mountain was quiet. I stumbled downhill for hours, guided by instinct more than memory, until I found pavement under my boots. A ranger truck passed, its headlights startling me like a dream too bright to be real. The man inside leaned out, frowning, asking if I was all right. I wanted to tell him everything. The sounds, the echoes. the way the mountain had tried to hollow me out. But when I opened my mouth, only a whisper came. "Don't go up there." He frowned deeper but didn't press. He helped me into the truck, turned the heat on, and drove me down the winding road. The hum never returned. Not once. But even now, safe miles away, I don't dare raise my voice. I don't shout. I don't sing. Because I know the truth. The mountain doesn't forget. Every sound you make, it keeps. And one day, when the ridges hum again, it'll come looking for me with every echo I ever gave it. And maybe next time, I won't be strong enough to say no. The storm that stopped outside town. I've spent my entire career trying to explain storms in terms of physics, pressure systems, warm water, and airflow. To me, a hurricane isn't supposed to feel alive. It's just a monstrous arrangement of measurable things, numbers and models. But I can't talk about what happened on Galveston Island in those terms, because that storm didn't move like storms move. It didn't behave like weather should. It came close enough that the air tasted of salt and iron, close enough that people felt it in their bones, the way animals sense an earthquake before it hits. But then it just stopped. That's the part I can't explain, and maybe that's why I haven't written any of this down until now. Because if I, a meteorologist, admit that a storm stopped in place and stared at a town, people will think I lost my mind. But I didn't imagine this. I lived it. It began on a Wednesday in late August, right when the Gulf is hot enough to spin disaster out of thin air. I'd been tracking the system for 3 days already. At first, it was just a tropical wave, nothing unusual. Then it tightened, strengthened, and ballooned with frightening speed. I watched it bloom on the satellite screens like a bruise spreading across skin. By the time it had a name, Hurricane Inez, it was already a Category 3. Normally, when storms form out there, I rely on the models. They're never perfect, but they give you a sense of where the cone of probability points. This one? It didn't fit. Every model diverged after 12 hours. Some sent it toward Louisiana, others swung it toward Mexico, but a disturbing number showed a beeline for Galveston. I was working out of a small station near the seawall, just a converted RV we'd been using for field data collection. The permanent lab inland was being renovated, so the van became my temporary office. Equipment bolted to the walls, humming generators, screens glowing with live data feeds. It wasn't glamorous, but it let me smell the air, taste the salt, feel the barometer in my own body. That morning, the pressure dropped hard. You don't need instruments for that. It presses against your ears, makes your joints ache, like the atmosphere itself is leaning on you. Inez was churning up the Gulf, swelling in strength, pushing water towards shore. By midday, we had mandatory evacuation orders, only people didn't leave. Not all of them. Maybe they'd seen too many storms spin away at the last minute. Maybe they trusted the seawall. Maybe they just didn't believe. I saw families barbecuing on their porches as the first feeder bands of rain swept the streets, kids running through puddles while wind tore the sky open. By nightfall, the storm was 30 miles offshore. I expected it to slam into us before dawn. It didn't. It stopped. I mean that literally. Inez stalled, the eye widened, its wall rotating with violent precision, yet the whole system froze in place. 30 miles out, staring at the island, I watched it all night to data streaming in, pressure still dropping, winds whipping the Gulf into a white froth, and yet the storm refused to make landfall. At first, I thought it was just stalling. It happens sometimes with steering currents failing, but the longer I watched, the more wrong it felt. Hurricanes wobble, drift, pulse. They don't hold their ground like predators circling, but Inez did. By sunrise, panic started to creep into me. The sky was a bruised gray-green with clouds racing low, but the rain never fully reached shore. It was as if the storm had drawn a line in the water and decided not to cross it. I tried to calm myself with numbers, wind speeds, shear levels, ocean temperature, but no equation could explain why the storm wouldn't move. Around mid-morning, I stepped outside the RV to clear my head. The air was thick, heavy, metallic. It didn't smell like a normal storm. Usually hurricanes smell of salt and ozone, that sharp electric tang. This smelled chemical, like wet copper, like blood. And it was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your heart race because you know it shouldn't exist. No gulls wheeling overhead, no dogs barking in the distance, no cars, just the faint grinding roar of wind far offshore, like a beast pacing a cage. Then the calls started. Neighbors banging on the RV door. What's it doing? Why isn't it moving? Their voices were tight, clipped, already teetering on the edge of fear. I tried to give them answers, but every explanation tasted like a lie. By that afternoon, people began driving inland. Not an evacuation, not coordinated, just a slow trickle of cars leaving the island. Others stayed, watching the storm like it was a fire on the horizon, waiting to see if it would come closer. I stayed too. My equipment was here, my work was here, and part of me, this part I can't forgive, was curious. That night, things got worse. The storm didn't weaken. Usually, stalling sucks the energy out of hurricanes. Cool water churns up and they collapse. But Inez only grew, stronger, more defined, like it was feeding on something deeper than the Gulf. I watched the eye on infrared, perfect, circular, glowing with violent heat. I couldn't stop staring at it. It looked back. I know how insane that sounds, but that's how it felt, like a pupil, like the storm had turned its gaze toward Galveston and fixed on us with intention. And that's when the sounds began. Not thunder, not waves, not wind, voices. Faint, stretched thin by distance like someone calling across a canyon. I stepped outside at 2 a.m, drawn by them. The air was still, heavy, humming faintly, like every molecule vibrated at once. I stood there barefoot on the damp pavement, listening, and I swear, God help me, I heard my own name. Soft, carried on the air. Not a shout, not an echo, just my name spoken low and even, as if the storm had pulled my voice from some memory and fed it back to me. I stumbled inside, locked the RV door, tried to drown it out with radio chatter. But the radio hissed with static, no matter what frequency I tuned. A low, rhythmic clicking threaded through the static like a heartbeat. By dawn, I hadn't slept. I tried to call inland, send data through the satellite feed, but the transmissions failed. The equipment showed strong signal, no technical issue, but nothing left the van. Like the storm itself was blocking it. Meanwhile, the people still on the island were unraveling. Some packed their cars and fled. Others just sat on porches, staring out toward the Gulf, faces pale and hollow. I saw one man walk straight into the surf, clothes on, no hesitation. He kept walking until the water covered his head. I should have run then. I should have left everything and driven until my tank was dry. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because the storm was still watching, and I needed to know what it wanted. The third night was the worst. The voices grew louder, not just mine now, others. Children crying, a woman singing, a man reciting numbers like coordinates. All overlapping, carried on the still air, impossible but undeniable. I covered my ears, but the sounds weren't only external. They burrowed in, vibrating against the inside of my skull, resonating in my teeth. And beneath it all, that low clicking rhythm pulsed steady, steady, steady. When I opened my eyes, the RV windows were wet with condensation. Except, not condensation. Shapes, pressed from the outside like hands against glass, palms smeared, fingers dragging slow. I don't remember unlocking the door, but I found myself outside, standing on the road in bare feet again, staring toward the Gulf. The eye of Inez glowed faintly in the distance. Not lightning, light, a pale circle, rimmed in black cloud, hovering on the horizon like an enormous, unblinking eye. And I realized then that it wasn't stalled by accident. It was waiting. For us, for me. I don't know how long I stood there in the road. The air was damp, thick, but not moving. My shirt clung to me, not from wind or rain, but from a kind of heavy condensation that soaked into everything. Behind me, the RV door stood open. Inside, the lights flickered faintly, struggling against something invisible. And ahead, 30 miles out, that eye stared. It wasn't a storm anymore. Not to me. It was a presence. I felt it pressing into me, some pressure that wasn't barometric, wasn't measurable by any device I had. It was inside my body. My chest fluttered. My legs trembled. It was like being too close to a massive speaker, vibrations crawling through bone and muscle, shaking loose the soft things inside me. And underneath all that was hunger. It wasn't my thought, not exactly. It was like a shadow sliding across my own mind, a suggestion pressed against me until it became indistinguishable from my own fear. It wants something. I don't remember walking back into the RV, but I woke to daylight with the door closed, the equipment still humming, though every monitor had frozen sometime during the night. My name flickered across one of the screens in pale, glitched text, letter by letter, as if the storm itself had typed it. That was the moment I knew I couldn't rationalize it anymore. This wasn't weather. Or maybe it was. Something so far beyond our understanding of weather that my job, my degrees, my science, all of it, felt like sticks and stones against a machine built of galaxies. By then, Galveston wasn't functioning as a town. Half the island had emptied out. The others who remained were dazed, hollow-eyed, drifting through the days like sleepwalkers. I went to check on a neighbor, an older man named Kemp, who'd always bragged he'd ridden out every storm since '61. I found his front door wide open, his car still in the drive, food half prepared on the counter, but the house silent. He was gone. I started seeing more of that. Houses with lights on, doors ajar, no one inside, vehicles abandoned mid-street, and the worst thing? No looting, no chaos, just absence. It was like people were quietly being taken. By the fifth day, I hadn't eaten more than a few crackers. My body felt wrong, weak but wired. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale glowing circle on the horizon, rimmed with black clouds, staring. I dreamed of water, miles deep, pressing against my lungs, pulling me under. And always, the voices. Sometimes they said my name. Sometimes it was other words, pleas, prayers, threats whispered like lullabies. Sometimes the voices were my own, repeating things I'd never said, conversations twisted back at me. Once I heard my father's voice. He's been dead for years. Come outside, he said. Calm, kind. The way he used to coax me out of bed as a child when a storm had knocked the power out and we needed to light candles. I almost obeyed, but something deeper than reason held me back. A primal refusal, the animal instinct that recognizes the wrongness of a predator's mimicry. By the sixth night, the storm still hadn't moved. If anything, it had grown larger, the eye dilating across the gulf, swallowing more horizon. I tried again to transmit data. I wrote out a full report, a confession disguised as analysis, and attempted to beam it inland. The screen filled with static and spat back only fragments of my own words, rearranged. Not storm. Watching. Waiting. Come out. That's all it sent back. I don't know if I screamed or cried or both. My throat ached after. At some point, sleep overtook me. Not restful, not chosen. Sleep like drowning. And when I woke, I wasn't in the RV. I was outside, standing barefoot on wet sand. The gulf spread before me, black and endless. The tide had receded unnaturally far, sucking the beach into a vast plain of slick, shining sand. Out there, under the bruised glow of the sky, I saw shapes moving. Not waves, not boats. Shapes that stood, hunched, and then dropped to all fours, crawling toward the shore. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned, desperate to run, but the RV, the seawall, the island itself was gone. Behind me stretched only more sand, endless, featureless. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, watching those shapes draw closer. They didn't splash, they didn't stumble. They crawled like they belonged in that drowned space between sea and land. Then I blinked, and I was back inside the RV. I tasted salt in my mouth, grit between my teeth. My feet were coated in wet sand. I lost track of time after that. Maybe a day, maybe two. I remember smashing the radio equipment in panic, but hearing the clicking rhythm continue even after the wires lay severed. I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself, eyes bloodshot, skin sallow, lips cracked from whispering words I didn't remember speaking. And I remember one more thing, the last clear event before it all collapsed. On the seventh night, Inez moved. Not toward us, not away. It rotated slowly, deliberately, keeping its eye fixed on Galveston, but sliding east, dragging its wall across the coastline. Rain bands lashed Louisiana, thunderheads rising like black cathedrals, but here on the island, it remained dry, unbroken, watching, as if it had shown me what it could do, then decided to spare me, or worse, to keep me. That was when the last of the people left. I watched cars stream off the causeway, their taillights shrinking into the distance until I was alone, truly alone. I thought about leaving. God, I thought about it. But every time I stepped toward the driver's seat, something stopped me. My body refused. My legs locked. It was as if the storm itself had planted an anchor inside me. So I stayed. Until the morning, the eye vanished. Just gone. No warning. The satellite feed showed only open Gulf. Clear skies overhead. Wind faded. Birds returned. Galveston baked in sudden, merciless sun. The storm had left, but it hadn't weakened. I checked reports later. When communications were restored, Hurricane Inez simply slid east and made landfall in Louisiana, destroyed 2 parishes, killed hundreds, then dissipated inland, and I remained in Galveston, alive, untouched. The island slowly filled again. Months later, businesses reopened, tourists returned. People spoke of the storm like it was a near-miss miracle, a twist of fate. They rebuilt, they laughed, but I couldn't, because I know it didn't pass us by. It didn't miss, it chose. It spared Galveston, it spared me. And sometimes when the air pressure drops suddenly, when the horizon takes on that sickly green, when the radio clicks in patterns I can almost recognize, I feel it again. Watching, waiting, not gone, never gone. I wish I could tell you that time dulled it, that weeks turned into months, and the storm became just another scar on the map of my career. But the truth is, it never left me, not really. I kept working at first. Colleagues called me lucky, joked that I'd chosen the only safe square on the whole Gulf Coast that week. They wanted me to lecture, to write about the experience. But when I tried to put words down, my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold a pen. And what could I say? That a hurricane stopped to look at me? That I heard my dead father's voice on the air? That people vanished without a trace and the city shrugged and went on living? You don't write that in a journal article. You bury it. You smile when people clap your back and call you a survivor. But at night, the truth crept back in. I began sleeping with the radio off, the phone unplugged. Yet I'd still hear it, low in the silence between breaths. A rhythmic clicking, faint but insistent. Sometimes slow, sometimes racing. Always there if I listened too hard. And sometimes when the Gulf air grew heavy with that metallic tang, I'd hear the voices again. My name, my father's song, children crying across an impossible distance. That's when I knew I couldn't stay in Galveston. I left 6 months after Inez, transferred to a research facility inland, buried myself in statistical work far from the shoreline. But moving inland didn't save me. It just made me harder to find when it returned. Because it did return. Not the storm itself, not on maps or radar, but pieces of it. The first time was 2 years later. I was driving west through Texas, long empty miles of scrub and barbed wire, when the sky ahead darkened without warning. Not clouds, shadow, a dome of bruised air. The radio flickered, filled with static, then cleared long enough to whisper my name. My hands went cold on the wheel. And there it was again, that pressure. That weight inside my bones. I pulled off the road and sat there for an hour, waiting. The sky cleared as if nothing had passed overhead. When I finally drove again, my rearview mirror showed a thin line of storm clouds on the horizon, just far enough to follow. The second time was in Denver. I'd been invited to a conference, presenting on atmospheric anomalies. I gave the talk, nodded through the applause, and afterwards slipped into the bathroom to throw up. Because halfway through the presentation, one of the slides had flickered. Just a frame, half a second, no one else seemed to notice. But I did. It was the eye. That pale glowing circle rimmed with black, a storm image that wasn't in any of my data sets. And beneath it, in faint text at the bottom corner, "Come outside." I didn't tell anyone. I just left early, caught the first flight home, and didn't sleep for 3 days. The worst came later, years after, when I thought maybe I'd imagined everything. I started drinking more than I should have, telling myself I was fine. I even went back to Galveston once. It had been rebuilt, new shops, tourists everywhere, a whole city pretending nothing had ever happened. I walked the seawall at dusk, salt thick in the air, kids laughing in the surf, and then I saw him. Kemp, the old man who'd vanished from his house the week of the storm. He was standing barefoot at the tide line, pants rolled up, staring out at the Gulf. I froze. He hadn't aged a day. His skin looked pale, waxy, like he'd been soaking in water. His eyes were empty. I called his name, voice trembling. He turned toward me slowly, like the motion cost him, and when he opened his mouth, seawater poured out. I ran. I never went back. Now it's been more than a decade since Inez. I've moved 3 times, always further from the coast. I don't chase storms anymore. I teach climate science, data modeling, safe things that keep me inside sterile classrooms. My colleagues think I grew cautious with age. I let them believe that. But the truth is, I hear it again. That clicking, louder this time. Sometimes it echoes in pipes, sometimes in the hum of fluorescent lights, sometimes in my own heartbeat. And when I close my eyes, I see that eye again, pale and unblinking, hovering just past the horizon. I don't think it's gone. I think it's waiting. And sometimes when storms form in the Gulf, I watch the satellite feeds. I tell myself it's professional curiosity, but it's not. I'm looking for it. Inez. Not the name, not the storm itself, but the thing inside it. Last month, a new system flared. The models showed it moving east away from Texas, but one frame, just one, showed it pausing, staring. That's why I'm recording this now, because I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The pressure's dropping. The air smells like copper. And last night, in the dark, I woke to the sound of my father's voice outside the window. "Come out," he said. Calm, kind, patient. I didn't move, but I know it's only a matter of time. The storm doesn't forget. It waits. And when it comes again, this time I don't think it'll stop outside town. The night I first pulled my RV onto that gravel turnout in Alaska, the world felt too big for one man to face alone. The mountains rose like stone guardians, their ridgelines jagged against a sky that never seemed to sleep. The air was sharp, metallic, and pure, so cold it burned when I drew it in too fast. I killed the engine, and with that silence came the sound of my own heart, suddenly louder than the forest around me. It struck me then that solitude, true solitude, wasn't peaceful at all. It was a weight pressing on the chest, reminding you of how small you really are when the wilderness has no interest in your survival. I'd driven north for days, chasing something I couldn't name. Maybe it was freedom, maybe punishment, maybe just the hunger for a story no one else had lived. People said Alaska would test you, strip you down until all that was left was what you could endure. I thought I was ready for that test. What I didn't expect was how quickly confidence could dissolve when the last gas station was 100 miles behind and the map in your glove compartment showed nothing but endless white. Out here, mistakes weren't inconveniences. They were sentences. The first night was uneventful, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking at the sound of the RV shifting, though the wind outside was calm. A faint creak, like a boot pressing the step, made me freeze in my bed. I told myself it was the cold shrinking the metal. Still, I reached for the hatchet I kept under the bench, gripping it until my knuckles ached. In the morning, there were no tracks in the frost. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Sometimes the absence of proof feels like its own kind of evidence, something you can't quite put your finger on, but that gnaws at you anyway. By the third day, I'd learned to measure time differently. Out here, hours weren't counted by clocks, but by how long your generator ran before you needed fuel, by how much daylight you had before the shadows stretched long enough to unsettle your mind. I parked near a river that sang low under a thin sheet of ice, and for a while I thought I'd found a perfect camp. But as evening set in, the temperature dropped faster than I'd ever seen. My breath fogged so thick it felt like smoke. The silence grew oppressive, so total that when I coughed, it startled me. That's when I heard it, the faint click of something tapping against my RV's back panel. At first I thought it was the wind flicking a loose branch, but the pattern was too deliberate. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. I stepped outside with a flashlight, my boots crunching the frost. Nothing, the beam revealed nothing but my own tracks circling the RV. And yet, when I went back inside and turned off the light, the tapping started again. I pressed my ear against the wall, pulse hammering in my temples. It was coming from just beneath me, from under the RV itself. I nearly swung the hatchet through the floor in panic before reason took over. If I wanted to survive here, I couldn't lose myself to every shadow. I told myself it was ice shifting on the frame. Told myself until I almost believed it. The next morning, my waterline was frozen solid despite the insulation. I tried to thaw it with my camp stove, but as I crouched there, I saw something etched faintly into the frost on the side window. 4 parallel lines like claw marks, but too even, too straight, as if someone had pressed their fingers carefully, slowly, into the ice. They were gone within an hour of sunlight, but I couldn't unsee them. I kept asking myself, who or what had the patience to do that in the freezing dark without leaving so much as a footprint? As the days stretched on, solitude began to warp my senses. I'd catch movement in the tree line, quick and deliberate, but when I stared, nothing stirred. Sometimes I swore I smelled wood smoke on the wind, faint as if from a distant campfire. But I knew there was no one out here but me. That contradiction was worse than danger. If it was real, it meant I wasn't alone. If it wasn't, it meant my mind was slipping. Either way, it scared me more than any bear or storm could. One night, the tapping escalated into a dragging sound, a slow scrape beneath the RV that made the whole vehicle vibrate. I climbed out with the hatchet in hand, flashlight beam cutting across the frozen earth. My breath fogged, my pulse thundered, but there was nothing. No marks under the rig, no disturbed frost. Just me, shivering under a sky that was too clear, too endless, as though the stars themselves were witnesses. I wanted to pack up, to drive until I reached the comfort of noise, people, gas station lights. But the road was ice-slick, winding, and unforgiving. I had to wait. I had to endure. And in that wait, the wilderness taught me something cruel. Out here, fear wasn't loud. It didn't roar or scream. It whispered. It pressed into your routines, made you doubt your own senses, turned every creak of the RV frame into a question of survival. The unseen dangers weren't just in the forest, they were in the cracks of your mind, in the way isolation could chip away at your grip on what was real. I had come seeking a test of strength. What I found instead was a lesson. When you camp alone in Alaska, the most dangerous thing isn't always outside your door. Sometimes it's already inside with you, waiting for the quiet to break you open. The 4th night felt like a curtain, fast, heavy, absolute. Even though I'd been watching the sky dim for hours, the moment the last color drained, I felt the land close in. Darkness in Alaska wasn't the same as back home. It wasn't absence of light, it was presence. It pressed in, thick and endless, swallowing the glow of my lantern until it looked like a frail ember against an ocean of black. The RV felt too small, too fragile, like a toy house dropped in a wilderness that wanted it gone. That evening, I'd parked in a clearing not far from an abandoned logging road. The map didn't even mark it anymore, but I'd found it cutting through the forest, swallowed by moss and snowdrifts. There was a rusted signpost with letters too worn to read, leaning at an angle like even metal couldn't hold out against this place. Something about that road unsettled me. It seemed to breathe with the wind, like it wasn't empty at all, but waiting. Still, it was the only level ground I could find, and fatigue outweighed instinct. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of crunching snow. Not taps this time, not drags. Footsteps, slow, steady, circling. I lay frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Every step crackled sharp through the silence, deliberate, unhurried. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't lost. They were confident. They knew exactly where I was. My chest tightened, heart racing so loud I was sure it would give me away. I reached for the hatchet, but my hand trembled so badly I almost dropped it. Then came the soft brush of a hand, or maybe fur, against the RV wall. A caress, not a strike. The kind of touch that says, I know you're in there. I sat there gripping that handle until my muscles screamed. Minutes dragged into an eternity, and then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. No retreat, no sprint into the forest. Just gone. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. It told me I hadn't imagined it. It told me I'd been noticed. The next morning, I forced myself outside. The sun was pale, offering no warmth, but at least it revealed the ground. My breath caught. There were no footprints. Not around the RV, not leading in or out. Just the pristine crust of snow, untouched, except where my own boots had landed. I crouched there, staring at the ground until my eyes blurred. My rational brain tried to piece it together. Maybe ice had cracked under the RV frame. Maybe I'd been dreaming, halfway between waking and sleep, but deep down I knew better. Dreams didn't leave you shaking in the daylight. Later that day, while scouting the tree line for firewood, I stumbled across something worse. About 50 yards out, a circle had been carved into the snow. Perfectly round, as though traced by a compass. Inside the circle, every inch of frost had been cleared away to bare earth, and at the center, a pile of river stones was stacked into a crude cairn. Nothing about it felt natural. The stones were too neatly balanced, too purposeful. I didn't touch it. I didn't even step closer. I just backed away, slow and careful, like distance could erase the fact that I'd seen it. That night, the cold came sharper than ever. I piled every blanket, every scrap of clothing over myself, but it wasn't enough. My breath condensed into frost on the ceiling above my bed. I was drifting between shivers and half-sleep when I heard something new. A voice. Not words exactly, but tones, murmurs, almost like someone speaking through water. It seeped through the RV walls, thin and muffled, rising and falling like a chant. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound didn't vanish. It was inside my head as much as outside. I wanted to tell myself it was the wind curling through the trees, but wind doesn't form rhythm. Wind doesn't pause like it's waiting for a response. I stayed in bed, frozen in fear, until a single word surfaced clear among the murmur. My name. Whispered like an invitation or a warning. At dawn, I packed fast. The roads were slick with ice, but staying felt worse than the risk of driving. I turned onto that forgotten logging road, thinking I could cut back toward the highway. The forest swallowed me whole. Trees leaned heavy with frost, their trunks black against the snow. My tires crunched slow, cautious, every curve tighter than it looked. The further I went, the more the world seemed to close around me, until I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. And then I saw it. Another circle in the snow, this one spanning the entire road. My tires halted just short of it. At its center, another cairn of stones, but this time wedged between two rocks, was something that made my stomach turn cold. A strip of fabric. Dark red flannel. The exact pattern of the shirt I was wearing. I reached instinctively for my chest, half expecting to find it torn, but my shirt was intact. Still, there it was, waiting for me in the snow, as if someone or something had gone ahead of me and left it as a marker. I didn't step out. I didn't even put the RV in gear. I just sat there staring, feeling the weight of the trees pressing in, the silence, listening. That was the moment I realized Alaska wasn't trying to test me. It wasn't trying to teach me. It was warning me. And the worst mistake I could make was ignoring it. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed it at me, clawed at me, begged me to put the RV in reverse and leave that circle of stones behind. But the road was too narrow. The edges lined with snowdrifts that could swallow a tire whole. And the trees pressed so close together, it felt like they'd snap the mirrors if I angled wrong. Forward seemed like the only option, even though every nerve in me knew it was a trap. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white, eased the RV past the circle, and never once let my eyes leave that strip of red flannel wedged between the rocks. For miles, the forest grew thicker, the daylight dimmer, as though the sky itself was being strangled. The road narrowed until it was hardly more than two ruts in the ice. My headlights bounced weakly against the trunks, swallowed by shadows before they reached 10 yards out. I drove slow, careful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't navigating the road. It was navigating me. Every turn seemed to bend me deeper, further from escape. I glanced at my GPS once, desperate for reassurance, but the screen was a blank void. No roads, no signal. Just the little arrow of my RV drifting over nothing. Then the engine sputtered. Once. Twice. A coughing choke that sent dread through me, colder than the air outside. I had half a tank of gas, but the gauge wavered like it couldn't make up its mind. I tapped the glass, cursed under my breath, prayed it was just the cold stiffening the lines. The RV jerked, then steadied, but the message was clear. I couldn't count on it to carry me out. The machine that had always been my shelter, my armor, was starting to falter. I pulled into a narrow turnout, killed the engine to save what I had left, and stepped outside. My boots crunched on snow, but it was different this time. The sound didn't echo. It was swallowed, deadened as though the trees drank it in. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight beam cutting through frost. That's when I saw the third cairn. This one was smaller, placed right at the edge of the turnout, almost at my feet. On top of the stones lay a strip of leather, a bootlace. It was frayed at one end, stiff with frost. My breath hitched. I glanced down at my own boots. One of my laces was split at the tip, fraying the exact same way. That was when denial snapped. This wasn't random. This wasn't natural. Something out here was tracking me, marking me, echoing me, and I couldn't explain it away as wind or ice or dreams anymore. The woods shifted then. Not the trees themselves, but the way they felt. Heavy, expectant. I heard the faint crunch of snow again, footsteps, but not circling this time. Approaching, steady, confident, unhurried. My flashlight cut between the trunks, but the beam only found more darkness. Still, the sound kept coming until it stopped just beyond the edge of light. Close. Too close. I raised the hatchet with a shaking hand, heart hammering so hard it hurt. My mouth was dry, but I forced myself to call out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked, thin and weak, swallowed by the forest. For a moment, there was nothing. And then, in the same muffled cadence I'd heard through the RV walls the night before, came an answer. Not words, just the sound of my own voice, repeated back to me. Fragile, hollow. "Who's there?" I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the snowbank. My chest heaved, breath fogging so thick I could hardly see. That's when the smell hit me. Not wood smoke this time. Something sour, metallic, like iron left to rust in the rain. It clung to the air, filled my lungs, made my stomach twist. I gagged, staggered back into the RV, and slammed the door behind me. Inside, the silence was worse. It pressed against the windows, heavy and patient, as though whatever was out there knew I was trapped. I gripped the hatchet so tight my hand cramped, sat in the dark with only the thin hum of the RV's systems keeping me tethered to reality. Hours bled together. I must have dozed at some point, because I woke with a jolt to the sound of scratching on the glass. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails tracing letters. I didn't look right away. I was too afraid of what I'd see. When I finally forced myself to glance at the window, there was nothing written there. Just faint streaks where the frost had been disturbed. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. On the outside edge of the glass, pressed flat against the frost, was a handprint. Not large, not monstrous. Human. Almost the size of mine. And when I pressed my palm against the glass in shock, it lined up perfectly. The hand pulled away, leaving only the melted outline. And in that moment, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I wasn't being followed by something unknown. I was being followed by something that knew me, something that could mirror me, step for step, breath for breath. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against the RV's door, hatchet across my lap, watching my own breath fog the air until the frost on the window grew thick enough to hide the handprint. I tried to tell myself I'd hallucinated it, that isolation was peeling away the layers of reason until my mind was inventing company. But that didn't explain the perfect alignment. That didn't explain the fabric in the cairn, the lace on the stones, the sound of my own voice answering me from the dark. By dawn, I was unraveling. My hands shook as I tried to boil water for coffee, sloshing half of it over the burner. The generator whined, coughed, then steadied, but its stutter made me flinch like a gunshot. I felt like the RV itself was conspiring against me, each noise a reminder of how fragile my sanctuary was. The woods outside seemed unchanged, blanketed in calm, as if mocking the storm inside my chest. I knew I couldn't stay. Every mile I lingered meant another cairn, another sign, another mirror of myself waiting ahead. I packed hastily, shoved loose gear into cupboards without care, and fired the engine. It groaned in protest, then roared to life. Relief washed through me like a drug. Forward. I had to keep moving forward. The road wound tighter, more treacherous, the snow-packed ruts steering me more than my own hands on the wheel. Branches clawed the sides of the RV, screeching across metal, snapping back like they wanted to drag me out. I leaned close to the windshield, scanning every shadow for movement, every bend for another stone circle. Hours blurred into a haze of ice, breath, and fear. Then, around a curve, I saw it. My stomach dropped. Another turnout, another cairn at its center. But this one was different. No cloth, no lace. Instead, atop the stones lay a small mirror. Its surface was cracked, but when my headlights hit it, it reflected my face back at me. Distorted, fractured, as though pieces of me were already broken apart. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, fish-tailed, came to a shuddering stop just short of the circle. My heart hammered in my ears. I stumbled out, drawn toward that mirror against all reason. The air burned my lungs, every breath shallow in the cold. I crouched near the cairn, snow crunching beneath me, and stared into the glass. For a second, it showed only my face, wild-eyed, lips chapped, pale with fear. But then the reflection blinked. I hadn't. My breath caught. The figure in the glass smiled faintly, a tight curve of lips before the crack swallowed it into fragments. I staggered back, slipped on the ice, scrambled to my feet, and ran for the RV. My hands fumbled the latch, slipped on frozen metal, finally wrenched it open and dove inside. I slammed the door, chest heaving, throat raw with air too cold to swallow. The mirror's image burned in my mind. Me, but not me. Something waiting for me to falter so it could take the rest. I drove recklessly after that, tires skidding on curves, speed climbing too high for the conditions. Every second I stayed on that road felt like one step closer to becoming whatever was staring back at me. But the forest didn't loosen its grip. No matter how far I pushed, the trees only grew denser, the snow deeper, the road thinner. I checked my watch. Hours had passed, but the light never changed. The sky stayed locked in a dim gray, like morning stretched forever without reaching day. That's when I realized I hadn't seen another trailhead, no distance markers, nothing familiar. It felt like the road wasn't leading me out at all, but further in. A slow horror crept through me, colder than the air, heavier than exhaustion. I wasn't leaving, I was being led. When the engine sputtered again, my blood turned to ice. I slammed the dashboard, begged, prayed, but the needle hovered near empty, even though I'd filled up before heading out. I pulled into another clearing just as the RV died completely, lights flickering, heat choking off. Silence fell so absolute I could hear my own pulse pounding in my skull. And then came the footsteps. Not circling this time. Approaching, straight toward me. Crunch, crunch. My breath hitched with every step. I forced myself to the window, peeled back the curtain with trembling fingers. At first, nothing. Just trees, snow, the blur of frost. Then, between the trunks, a figure. It stood too still to be human. Shoulders hunched, head tilted, watching. I couldn't see its face through the frost, but I knew that if I wiped the glass clean, it would be my own staring back. The footsteps stopped just outside the RV. Silence. A pause that stretched into forever. Then a soft knock against the metal door. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. My hatchet felt useless in my hand. My voice failed me. I sat frozen, paralyzed, as the knock repeated, patient and deliberate, waiting for me to answer. The knocking didn't stop. It didn't grow louder, didn't grow faster. It just kept going, steady as a heartbeat. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. Each cycle landed deeper in me, shaking my ribs, syncing with the thud of my own chest until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or feeling it. I pressed my back hard against the opposite wall, hatchet clutched so tight it dug into my palm, but I didn't move toward the door. Because I knew, God, I knew, that if I opened it, something wearing my face would be waiting on the other side. The air inside the RV felt heavy, thick, like the cold itself was pressing through the walls. Frost spidered across the windows faster than I'd ever seen, sealing me in a cocoon of ice. My breath fogged and lingered, drifting instead of fading until it looked like smoke filling the cabin. The generator had long since gone silent. The silence now wasn't emptiness. It was anticipation. The knock stopped. For a moment, I almost prayed for it to come back because its absence was worse. My ears strained for sound, for anything. Then I heard it. The slow creak of weight settling onto the RV's roof. My blood froze. The metal groaned under deliberate steps, each one measured, testing. I craned my head upward, as if I could see through steel, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, though there was nowhere left to go. The steps shifted forward, then back, then stopped directly above me. The RV walls vibrated faintly as if something leaned down, listening. My throat tightened. I dared not breathe. And then softly from above came my own voice, clear this time, sharp against the stillness. Let me in. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't asked. It was spoken like fact, like inevitability. My skin crawled, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst. I clamped my hand over my mouth, afraid that if I made a sound, it would answer me again. The weight shifted. The steps creaked to the edge of the roof. Then silence. I waited, frozen, until my muscles ached, until my lungs screamed for air. And then I saw it through the windshield, a figure stepping down from the roof into the snow. My flashlight lay on the counter, and though my hands shook, I grabbed it and flicked it on. The beam cut across the clearing. There I was, standing in the snow 10 yards from my RV, staring straight back at me. My posture, my coat, my hat pulled low, my own breath fogging in the cold. But the eyes, God, the eyes, glowed faintly, reflecting the beam not like human eyes but like an animal's, and the mouth stretched too wide into a grin I had never made in my life. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, beam spinning across the ceiling. When I dared to look back up, the window was empty. The clearing was empty, but the snow beneath the windshield was no longer pristine. It was stamped with a set of footprints, mine leading directly to the RV's front door. The latch rattled once, twice, then stilled. I lunged forward, bracing my shoulder against the door, every muscle taut. My breath came ragged, vision swimming, ears roaring with my own pulse. Nothing, no more rattling, no more knocks, just stillness. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, hours. Time broke apart. My watch ticked nonsense. The frost grew thicker until I could no longer see the tree line. I thought of turning the key, of praying the engine would catch, but part of me knew the road wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. Then came the sound beneath me again. Scraping, dragging. But this time, it wasn't cautious, it wasn't patient, it was frantic, as if claws or hands were tearing at the undercarriage. The whole RV shuddered. A low groan of metal twisting filled the air. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the floor, and heard it. Breath. Ragged, wet, just inches below me. And then my own voice again, muffled, gurgling through the frame. You can't drive away. Panic detonated inside me. I leapt up, grabbed the keys, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared alive with a violence that made my chest lurch. I threw it into drive, tires spinning on ice, the RV fishtailing before catching traction. I didn't care where the road led. I didn't care if it curved into oblivion. I just knew I had to move. As the RV lurched forward, the scraping beneath me ceased. For a moment I thought I'd shaken it, but in the rearview mirror through the fogged glass I saw movement, a figure sprinting in the ruts behind me, keeping pace with impossible speed. My figure. My face. Mouth still stretched in that broken grin. And worse, there was another. Ahead this time, in the high beams, standing in the middle of the road, waiting. The wheel jerked in my hands as I swerved, heart detonating in my chest. The forest whirled past in a blur of snow and shadow. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about getting out. It was about not becoming what already waited for me in the dark. The RV screamed down that narrow road, tires chewing through snow, frame rattling like it would tear itself apart. The figure ahead stood frozen in the beams until the last second, then slipped sideways into the trees without breaking stride, like it knew exactly how close it could let me come before I hit it. My hands shook on the wheel, vision tunneling, every nerve sparking with terror. I wanted to believe if I just kept driving, if I just kept moving forward, I could outrun it. But deep down, I knew you can't outrun yourself. The rearview mirror was worse than the road ahead. I couldn't stop glancing at it, couldn't stop seeing flashes of movement in the ruts behind me. 1 second, it was empty. The next, my reflection sprinted in the dark, head tilting unnaturally, grin splitting wider than human skin should allow. Once, I swear it crawled on all fours, fast as a wolf, body jerking like a marionette yanked by unseen strings. Each glimpse made me want to rip the mirror off and hurl it out the window, but I couldn't look away. Because if I did, I knew it would be closer when I looked back. The road twisted tighter, banking sharp around a frozen creek. My headlights stuttered over trees, catching glimpses of shapes between them. Figures, plural now, standing in the shadows, each one the same outline as me. I gritted my teeth, slammed the wheel hard, and nearly lost control. The RV fishtailed, tires screaming, but somehow I kept it upright, barreling deeper into a wilderness that didn't seem to end. That's when the lights cut out. Both headlights winked black, plunging me into total darkness. My stomach plummeted. The engine still roared, but the world outside was gone, erased. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the trees, couldn't see if I was about to drive off into nothing. Panic ripped through me, hot and electric. I slammed the dashboard, flicked switches blindly, cursed until my throat tore, but the lights stayed dead. In that void, the windshield became a mirror. My own reflection stared back at me, faint in the glass, lit only by the glow of the dash. Except it wasn't exact. Its lips moved when mine didn't. Its eyes rolled upward when mine stayed locked. Then it leaned closer, out of sync, leaning toward me from the other side of the glass. I screamed, swerved, nearly clipped a tree I couldn't even see until the last second. Instinct took over. I stomped the brakes. The RV skidded, jolted, and came to a bone-rattling stop. My chest heaved, heart pounding so violently I thought I'd pass out. I sat in the dark, trembling, gripping the wheel until my knuckles burned. Then, through the silence, came the soft crunch of snow again. Slow, deliberate, not behind this time, beside. My eyes darted to the driver's side window, and there it was. My face pressed against the frost, skin pale and cracked like porcelain, eyes wide with hunger. Its breath fogged the glass in time with mine. And when I blinked, it didn't. I lunged back, hatchet raised, throat raw with a scream I couldn't contain. The glass didn't shatter, didn't even tremble, but the image slipped away, vanishing into frost. I staggered toward the back, tripping over gear, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The RV tilted faintly as weight shifted on the roof again. Then another set of steps, and another. The roof groaned under not one, but several figures moving above me. The lights flickered back on. Headlights, interior, all at once. The beams spilled forward onto the road, and my stomach clenched. Because standing there, just beyond the reach of the lamps, was a line of them. 6. Maybe 7. All of me. Faces lit just enough to show the grin. They didn't move. They didn't rush. They waited. Something inside me broke. I sprinted to the driver's seat, jammed the RV back into gear, and floored it. Tires spun, caught, hurled me forward into the light. I aimed straight at them, teeth bared, ready to smash through flesh and bone, if that's what it took. But the second I reached them, they dissolved into the trees, melting into shadow like smoke in the wind. My stomach lurched, my hands numb on the wheel. They didn't want to stop me. They wanted me to keep going. And as I sped down that endless road, it hit me with crushing certainty. This wasn't about scaring me into leaving. This was about driving me deeper, about wearing me down, breaking me apart piece by piece, until I couldn't tell where I ended and they began. And maybe, just maybe, I was already too late. I drove until my hands were numb, until my legs cramped from pressing the accelerator, until I couldn't tell if the roar I heard was the engine or the blood pounding in my ears. The road didn't change. Curve after curve, snow-slick ruts, trees crowding closer, sky locked in that same gray half-light. I felt like a rat in a maze that didn't have an exit. Every mile deeper stripped something from me. First my sense of direction, then my trust in time, then the fragile boundary between what I saw outside the windshield and what my mind conjured inside. I don't remember closing my eyes, but suddenly I was standing outside the RV in the snow. My breath came ragged, hatchet-heavy in my hand. I turned, searching for the rig, and found myself staring into the windshield. And behind the glass, I was inside, gripping the wheel, face pale, mouth wide with panic. I blinked. The figure blinked back. For one awful heartbeat, I didn't know which side I was truly on. The shock of cold brought me back. My eyes snapped open. I was in the driver's seat, after all, still moving, headlights cutting tunnels through frost. My hands trembled so violently I nearly lost the wheel. I didn't know if I'd dreamed that moment or if the road itself had pulled me out for a glimpse of what was waiting. But the taste of frost on my tongue was too real to ignore. I started talking to myself then. Not out loud at first, just little reassurances in my head. You're real. You're here. Keep moving. Don't stop. But after a while, I couldn't hear my own thoughts over the whispers. They were low at first, brushing the edge of silence, but soon they rose into murmurs, layers of voices overlapping. My own voice multiplied. They argued with me, mocked me, begged me. Sometimes they pleaded in pain. Sometimes they laughed. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound didn't fade. It was inside me. I screamed just to hear myself, to drown them out, but the scream came back doubled, tripled, echoed in tones I didn't make. The RV filled with the noise of me, but not me. The windshield frosted again, and shapes pressed against it from the outside. Hands, dozens of them, palms spread, fingers splayed. They smeared patterns into the ice, at first random, then deliberate. Lines crossing lines until they formed words. My name, over and over. My name in my own handwriting, scrawled in frost by hands that weren't mine. I slammed my fist against the glass, shouting for it to stop, but the words only grew denser, filling every inch until the whole windshield was nothing but my name layered over itself like a prison of letters. My vision swam. I couldn't breathe. I thought I'd suffocate under the weight of it. Then silence. Sudden, absolute. The frost cleared in a breath, and the road ahead was empty again. No words, no hands, just trees. I sagged against the wheel, gasping, sweat freezing to my skin. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd broken through, that whatever this was had finally finished with me. But then I saw it. In the passenger seat, fogged faintly against the glass, was another face. My face. It sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, lips curved in that same broken grin. Its breath fogged the window in rhythm with mine. And when I turned my head, slow as death, it turned too, but not all the way. Its eyes stayed locked on me. I screamed and swung the hatchet at empty air, the blade buried into the dashboard, sparks spitting as it sliced wiring. The RV lights flickered, died, then surged back brighter than before, and the seat beside me was empty again. But deep in my gut, I knew it hadn't left. It hadn't vanished. It was inside now, waiting for me to falter, waiting for me to forget where the edges of myself truly were. That was the moment I stopped asking if I'd make it out alive. I started asking a darker question instead. When this was over, if it ever ended, would there be enough of me left to call myself human? Or would I be nothing but another shadow in the tree line, grinning at the next fool who dared drive this road? The collapse didn't come all at once. It crept, like the frost spreading across the glass, like the whispers edging into my thoughts. I kept driving, but I no longer trusted the wheel in my hands. My knuckles ached from gripping it. Yet sometimes I'd glance down and swear I wasn't the one steering. The wheel twitched subtly, as though guided by a hand just beneath mine, nudging me deeper into the woods. When I tried to resist, the RV shuddered violently, skidding toward the trees until I relented. I started to lose track of what was inside the RV and what was outside. A shape in the passenger seat would vanish when I blinked, only to reappear pressed against the windshield, grinning from the snow. My reflection in the mirror didn't match my movements anymore. It would lag, hesitate, or sometimes keep staring when I looked away. Once, in a haze of exhaustion, I caught myself answering a question I hadn't asked aloud, and the sound of my voice came from behind me. Sleep clawed at me, but I knew if I gave in, I wouldn't wake up myself. The body that opened its eyes would smile too wide, breathe too slow, speak in echoes. I drove with matches jammed between my fingers to keep me awake, the sting of sulfur grounding me when my eyelids drooped. The whispers hated the smell. I could feel them retreat into corners when the acrid smoke filled the cabin. But the road kept going, and I was running out of matches. At some point, the forest opened into a vast, frozen clearing. Relief hit me like air after drowning, but it lasted only seconds. The headlights washed across dozens of cairns scattered across the ice, each one carefully built, stones balanced into impossible stacks. Atop every pile was something personal, an object I recognized. My old watch, lost years ago on a hiking trip. A wallet I'd misplaced as a teenager. A baseball cap my father had given me, long gone after a storm. And there, at the nearest cairn, sat my hatchet, the same one still clenched in my hand. I froze, staring between the stones outside and the steel in my grip. My chest tightened. One of them wasn't real, or maybe neither were. The whispers surged louder, frantic, as though urging me forward. My hand shook, knuckles white around the wheel. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. If I stepped outside, I feared I'd find nothing but empty cairns and realize I'd already left myself behind. But if I stayed inside, I'd rot in the grip of something that wanted to wear my skin. I slammed the RV into reverse, tires squealing on ice, and spun back toward the tree line. The road behind me had changed, narrower, darker, the trees crowding closer. Branches scraped against the roof, the sides, the windows, clawing with purpose now, as if the forest itself was trying to rip me open. I floored it anyway, head throbbing, vision streaked with sparks. The whispers broke into laughter, high, distorted, fractured. I knew the sound. It was mine. A chorus of me, filling every corner of the RV, mocking every desperate breath. My reflection in the windshield grinned wider, lips splitting to the ears, teeth too many, too sharp. And for one split second, I saw the truth. I wasn't escaping. I was feeding it. Every mile I drove, every scream I loosed, every heartbeat of terror was carving away pieces of me for it to claim. I pressed harder on the accelerator, even as the road curved tight ahead. Snow flew, branches cracked against the frame, and still the laughter rose. My chest heaved, my vision narrowed to a pinprick of white road ahead. The thought roared through me, clear and undeniable. If I didn't end this, it would. And that's when I made the decision. Not to keep running, not to play its game any longer. I tightened my grip on the wheel, teeth clenched until they ached, and aimed straight into the curve without slowing down. If the road was meant to take me, it would have to take all of me. The world erupted into white. Snow sprayed up like a tidal wave as the RV tore off the curve, tires screaming, frame lurching. I braced for impact, for the shattering crunch of metal against trees, but it never came. Instead, the RV seemed to plunge forward into nothing, as though the ground had dropped out beneath me. The headlights cut through a blur of swirling frost, and for a heartbeat, I thought I was airborne, suspended in a void that had no bottom. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, silence lay heavy around me. The RV was still, but not wrecked. No broken glass, no twisted steel, no crash to explain why I was alive. My breath puffed in the air, visible even inside, frost clinging thick to the walls. I pushed myself upright, muscles trembling, and realized the road was gone. The windshield showed only a flat, endless stretch of white beneath a sky drained of color. No trees, no curves, no sign of where I'd come from. I stumbled outside, boots sinking into snow so deep it swallowed my ankles. The cold bit straight through to bone, but I barely felt it over the terror pressing in. The RV sat alone in the middle of that blank expanse, and all around it rose cairns, hundreds of them, stretching out in every direction like a graveyard built by hands that had too much patience and no mercy. Each one bore something personal. Not just mine this time. Keys, gloves, photographs, scraps of clothing, lives etched into stone by people who had stood where I was standing now, people who hadn't left. The whispers returned, louder than ever, echoing from cairn to cairn until the whole field hummed with my voice. They weren't words anymore. They were fragments. Screams, laughter, pleas. Memories torn from me and repeated until I couldn't tell which had ever been real. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, and that's when I saw it. One cairn stood taller than the rest, directly in front of the RV. At its peak lay an object that made my stomach lurch. It was my driver's license. The photo was worn, the edges curled, but it was unmistakable. And the name etched on it wasn't just mine. It was scratched over, layered with dozens of versions, like the same name had been written again and again until it bled into the card. I staggered to my feet, stumbled toward it, hatchet clutched in my frozen fist. The closer I came, the louder the whispers swelled, until they weren't outside me at all, but inside my chest, vibrating my ribs, scraping against bone. My reflection, dozens of them, stared back from every shard of ice on the cairns. Some screamed, some smiled, some just watched, silent, waiting. I raised the hatchet. My hand shook so violently I could barely keep hold. If I destroyed it, if I smashed that cairn, maybe it would end. Maybe I'd cut myself free from whatever this was. But when I swung down, the blade met stone, and the echo that rang out wasn't metal against rock. It was my own scream, fractured and multiplied, rattling across the field until I thought my skull would split. The cairn didn't crumble. It only grew taller, stones rising higher, another layer added as if I just built part of it myself. And in that instant, the truth sank into me like ice water. This wasn't something I could break. This wasn't something I could fight. This place wasn't trapping me against my will. It was rebuilding me, piece by piece, reflection by reflection, until I wasn't me anymore, but one more voice in the chorus, one more face in the snow. The figures appeared then. Not one, not a dozen. An entire crowd surrounding the clearing, each one shaped like me. They stood silent, still, heads tilted at unnatural angles, watching. My knees buckled, vision tunneling, but I forced myself back toward the RV, stumbling, slipping, every breath ragged. I slammed the door shut behind me, teeth chattering, tears freezing on my face. The engine turned over on the first try. Too easy, too smooth. The headlights flickered back on, casting a tunnel of light through the frost. Ahead of me, the white expanse stretched on. No road, no markers, just endless snow. And somewhere deep inside, I knew, if I drove forward, I'd never stop. I'd become part of this place. But if I stayed, the shadows and the tree line would take me anyway. It wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. So I put my foot on the gas, hands trembling on the wheel, and let the RV roll into the void, whispers rising around me like a storm. For the first time, I didn't pray for escape. I prayed for memory, that if anyone ever found what was left of me, they'd understand what Alaska really holds in its unseen places. And as the snow swallowed the horizon, one final thought pulsed through me, clear and terrible. Out here, you don't die alone. You just disappear into yourself. The road, if it ever was a road, carried me until time lost its shape. I don't remember the hours, the days, just the drone of the engine, the frost gathering thicker on the inside of the glass, the way the horizon stretched flat and featureless, as if the world had been erased. I think I must have slept while still holding the wheel, because sometimes I'd blink and the dashboard clock would leap forward. Whole hours vanished. And each time I woke, I was less certain of who had been driving while I was gone. But eventually, silence. The RV sputtered, coughed, and rolled to a stop in the middle of that white nowhere. No more fuel, no more momentum, just stillness. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the frost-fogged windshield, waiting for the knock, the scrape, the sound of my own voice. But nothing came. Only silence, stretching wider than fear. And that silence taught me something brutal. Out here, alone in Alaska, the dangers aren't always teeth and claws, blizzards and cliffs. It's the unseen things, the weight of distance, the suffocating quiet, the way the wilderness reflects back pieces of you until you can't tell what's yours anymore. The forest doesn't need to kill you. It just waits for you to lose track of yourself, and then it keeps whatever you leave behind. I'd set out to test myself, to see what solitude could strip away and what strength I had left beneath it. But I learned the hardest truth in that frozen clearing. Strength isn't always enough. Instinct matters. Respect matters. Knowing when to turn back matters more than courage ever will. Because bravery without caution doesn't make you a survivor. It makes you prey. If you've ever thought about coming out here, parking your rig on some forgotten road in the Alaskan wilds, let me tell you this: the silence isn't empty. The dark isn't blind. The things you carry inside yourself will walk beside you, whisper through the walls of your camper, scrape their hands across your windows, and they will wait. And when they've taken enough of you, when you've ignored your gut long enough, they'll leave cairns behind with your name carved into the frost. I drove into Alaska thinking solitude would set me free. What I found instead is that freedom comes with teeth. It comes with eyes in the dark and voices in the wind. It comes with the question of whether you can survive not just the wilderness around you, but the wilderness inside. And if you think you're ready for that, I want you to ask yourself one thing. When you hear the knock on your RV door in the dead of night, steady and patient, 3 taps at a time, will you have the strength not to answer? Because out here, the unseen dangers don't kick the door in. They wait for you to let them inside. And the cruelest part, by the time you realize you've opened the door, it's already too late.